Welcome everybody back into Salt City Hoops. I'm so excited about the NBA draft. Guys, the Utah Jazz just made their most important draft selection in the entire history of the franchise. I cannot express how important this pick is for the community, for the team. I covered it earlier in a different episode. This is it. This is what will change the Jazz from nice team that we've had fun going into playoff runs and had some conference finals runs and even a finals appearance if you're old enough to remember the 90s. This changes from nice cute playoff team into, oh my god, this is a new era of Utah Jazz basketball. My excitement is not capable of being contained by itself. I need to spill it out with other people. So I needed to grab friends of Salt City Hoops that you know very well. We have Justin Sweeney and Riley Gisseman here to talk about the NBA draft, about Darryn Peterson, about the Jazz draft pick. Riley, start with you. How are you? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling the best I've ever felt in my life. This is amazing. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here, man. I can't believe draft day is come and gone. It's crazy.
And Justin, we have talked about the NBA draft for months and months in private channels. I know you have thoughts about all of these draft picks, but especially about Darryn Peterson. You feeling good?
I'm living in a world where I'm just literally and figuratively doing heel clicks down the street wherever I go. I've been pinching myself for the last 44 days alone from the Jazz winning the number 2 pick in the draft lottery. That alone is still almost incomprehensible. The Jazz have essentially, I don't think they've ever jumped up in the draft. I think the last time that there was, it was in the early 80s, but certainly not in our functional lifetimes that we can recall. That alone was the first miracle. Now, the second miracle was hitting the home run and knowing for all intents and purposes that down the road here on June 23rd, you're going to either end up likely with AJ DeBonta or Darryn Peterson, two amazing superstars, two players that before the draft lottery and given all of the math that was not in favor of the Jazz and the eventual realities that were even less in favor of the Jazz, draft lottery after draft lottery, for it to buck the trend, for the Jazz to finally buck the trend at the moment where they essentially needed it the most, to end up with Darryn Peterson is beyond a dream come true. And going into this draft lottery, you look at the roster, and it's pretty good, as you alluded to, Mark. Cute playoff team. I had high hopes for it. Really nice starting five alone, even before you obtained not just the number 2 draft pick, but from what the math was forecasting, anything from the 5 to 8 pick. So someone like Braden Burry's being added to the lineup that the Jazz already had in hand. That would have been a huge bonus. And to add Darryn Peterson, who a lot of smart people out there, a lot of people smarter than me, have regarded as, the greatest prospect of the decade, if not a longer timeline than that. To add him in as someone who most people think is going to be a franchise player, but given the roster, the high-quality roster Utah already has going into 26-27, to think of Darryn Peterson as only being icing on the cake right now, it's just almost too much talent to comprehend.
It's the excitement is palpable for all three of us, I think, and for Jazz Nation in general. Look, there's a lot of you who are listening, watching, whatever, who are, hey, yeah, it's wake me up when the Jazz are good. Well, consider yourself awoken, woken up.
Beep, 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 beep.
Here is the alarm, and so for folks who are like, look, I don't follow the draft, I don't follow anything, and who is Darryn Peterson? Why is everyone so excited? Well, first of all, let me say that moving up in the draft, as Justin alluded to, just does not happen for the Utah Jazz. First of all, we tend to be pretty good. Like we're typically, if we're in the lottery, it's going to be a late lottery situation. Otherwise, we're a playoff team. We don't move up, and when we have been bad, frankly, we just haven't had a whole lot of luck with moving up. So in timing, when the Jazz move up in the lottery has been perfectly timed with the 2026 NBA draft. This draft was meant to be, the way it was billed is to have 4 possible superstar talents. Obviously, every single NBA draft has a number of players throughout the first round that you can be excited about. Justin Sweeney invoked Braden Burry's name, and you don't have to be familiar with every single rookie that would be playing in the NBA, but coming into this draft, it was not considered a Victor Wembanyama or LeBron James draft, but rather you have 4 players who are probably a tier under them. You have AJ DeBonta. If you're in Utah or you're familiar with college basketball or Brigham Young University, DeBonsa was not originally a Utah product, but played his last couple years, or last year, I believe, at a prep school in Utah, where he then went on to Brigham Young University, aided by some name, image, and likeness money from one Ryan Smith to make sure that he stayed in Utah. And he looked incredible for Brigham Young University, and looks like, yeah, a 10 to 15 year NBA player. We're not going to get into the ups and downs of all these players, but just for those listening, he looked fantastic. You have Cameron Boozer. Hey, I remember that last name. Yeah, his dad was Carlos Boozer, who played for the Jazz, made all-star teams for the Jazz. And for some reason, a quick side note, everyone keeps referring to Carlos Boozer as a Chicago Bull, and that's bugging me, not just as like a Jazz homer guy, but like his best years are in Utah. What are we doing here? Anyways, Carlos Boozer is a scout for the Utah Jazz currently, and his son had a fabulous year for Duke. His other son, he has three sons, but he's got Caden and Cameron Boozer playing for Duke. Caden's a little bit smaller. He will be going back to Duke, but Cameron Boozer had an incredible Player of the Year season at Duke. And Caleb Wilson, athletic super freak out of North Carolina, was also kind of sneaking his way into everything. But the last guy is Darryn Peterson, who is perhaps the most mercurial of these four options. This is who the Jazz end up with. I say mercurial because typically these prospects go from high school to college, and regardless of what they perform on the court, gentlemen, they tend to follow just a normal prospect path of like, he does great in high school and he does some great things in college and now he's here. So this was a player who he's a combo guard, one guard, two guard, and actually that's frankly in question, but he's a backcourt guy who was on the ball exclusively in high school and showed a lot of distribution and passing chops in high school, but also he was the best player and amazing talent in high school, so he didn't exactly have to pass a whole lot. So he was a great scorer, passer, do-it-all guy in high school, goes to Kansas, highly touted recruit, gets a lot of NIL money to go to Kansas, and doesn't play a lot because of cramping issues, because of he would take himself out of games due to such cramping issues. There have been many news reports about why he took himself out of games. There was a report of during Bill Self, the head coach of Kansas's famous training camp week called Hell Week or whatever he calls it, like Darryn Peterson got so aggressively into it that he sent himself to the hospital because he had such debilitating cramping issues. And there was some medical workups of everything about like, hey, what actually caused those cramping issues. There's been a lot of debate about like what actually caused it. We still don't even know. All NBA teams who are looking at Darryn Peterson said like, hey, his medicals come up 100% clear. We have no idea what happened to this guy. So not only was he having health issues at Kansas, not like, oh, he tore his ACL or something where you're like, I don't know if this guy's going to be good, but rather mercurial unknown health issues combined with Kansas has some other backcourt players and non-shooters who needed the basketball. So all of the skills that Darryn Peterson showed in high school about being a ball in hand distributor kind of guy doesn't show up at Kansas. Not because he fails at it, but because he isn't given the opportunity. So then you end up in the NBA draft, the Jazz have the number 2 pick. Do you take the sure thing in Cameron Boozer, who has his limitations, but is, he's got Utah connections. You love him. AJ DeBonsa, drafted number 1 by the Wizards, so that frankly it just wasn't an option for the Jazz, so we don't really have to talk about that. Or do you go in for, hey, this guy was amazing in high school, showed amazing things in college, but just not his full toolkit. Do we take a chance on it? And that's who the Jazz take a chance on. The reason everyone's excited is because Kansas experience, Riley, and you've been a huge Darryn Peterson guy the whole way through. The Kansas experience is what experts are telling all of us was just not indicative of who Darryn Peterson is. And there is so much more to uncover. And it's not like we haven't seen it before. We've seen it in USA basketball. We've seen it in high school. Like, this is a guy who has a lot more to his toolkit as long as he gets into a professionally managed situation about his brain, about his body, and all these sorts of things. So that's why people smarter than me are really excited. Riley, I consider you to be smarter than me. Tell the fans why Darryn Peterson, all that background of like, okay, it was mercurial in Kansas, whatever. Why is this so amazing to get him versus some other random number 2 pick?
I I love it. I think it's a great question. I think when I think about the best number two picks in NBA, in the NBA since I've been watching the NBA at least, I think of Kevin Durant. I think of, Jabari Parker, Joel Embiid. I'm not sure which one of them was the number two pick. Uh, and then I think like John Morant, and then I have Darryn Peterson right there. Part of what is so exciting to me about Darren is that for as just off and weird that season was with Kansas, it was it it showed every single part of his game that people were unsure about, which was him playing off the ball, him running off screens, him as a more of an off-ball initiator and spacer, and um, that the fact that he came in and that was like his primary purpose in the offense was just extremely exciting to me. And to be honest, not only was he in that position, but he was extremely successful while he was in that position. He there's one advanced stat called BPM where you'll see a number of the best players in NBA history, or best draft prospects in recent NBA history: Zion Williamson, Steph Curry, Cooper Flag. You'll see a lot of these guys, and one player that comes up, despite all of these weird, issues with him, in the top, five of guard prospects in the last 20 years is Darryn Peterson. And it's like he was not the same player, which is it's just crazy because in high school he was this athletic, rise above and shoot from anywhere, and he definitely still had some of that in his game, but it was clear that he was being limited by the injury issues that he was going through, and he was still fantastic. I one thing that I really really like about Darryn Peterson is I would label him as a six level scorer, which is to say, I think that he can score from the rim, the mid range, and the 3-point line while he's on ball and off the ball. And that is an incredibly rare combination. I think when I've looked it up, the only players that have been able to do that consistently have been Kevin Durant and Karl Anthony Towns. And like that is some rare scoring company. And two players that, I mean, Kat just won a championship and Kevin Durant, one of the greatest players of all time. And I think Durant is one that I just really like the sort of, I don't know, framework for what he's put into the NBA as a scorer, both on and off the ball, and how that would convert into the Jazz system with Will Hardy and the movement offense. One thing that the Jazz front office will mention when you hear them talk about Darryn Peterson is that he's just an all-around player, and so he's got the defense, he's got the scoring on and off ball, he's got passing, and that just fits in to an NBA system. So it's
One of
very
my
exciting.
favorite things you mentioned was just like he is a wildly different player from what he was asked to do at Kansas, what he was capable of doing at Kansas. We don't really know the extent of what that binary is, but instead of that being a negative in your eyes, and I think a lot of people's eyes, and what you mentioned in the front office, that's actually a positive. That this is actually a basketball player who, when you ask him to do things, he does them at a superlative level. Justin, you're a basketball guy. You've seen a lot of basketball over the years, Division 3 to the NBA, women's, men's, and everything like that. You have been extremely excited about Darryn Peterson for several months, and I I don't even know what question to ask you, my friend. I just know that you think that we're on to something special here.
I can't restrain myself from wading right into hyperboleville because I feel like Darryn Peterson, when you look at the history of the Utah Jazz, he has a chance right away with good health and in years spent on the Jazz and just continuing his ascent. He already has a chance to be the greatest shooting guard in the history of the Utah Jazz. When you look at recent performances by Donovan Mitchell, Wesley Matthews, Jeff Hornacek, Daryl Griffith. To me, that's really the entirety of the list, and that's the bar he has to clear. But when you watch Darryn Peterson, I've said this to you before off air. To me, Jason Tatum, he's the first ever AI superstar in the history of the NBA. What I mean by that is Jason Tatum, he's a player created as if you carved him by taking a computer program and just crawling all of the footage of all of the great stars and crafting like your perfect small forward. But with that, there's really not any unique aspects of Jason Tatum. Everything comes from something else. So when you watch him, it's like, oh, there's that move he harnessed from Kobe. Oh, there's this move he harnessed from Kevin Garnett. And you see these different things with Jason Tatum, and you actually wonder, like, what's about Jason Tatum? I always think of his championship speech from 2024, and even in a speech, he was just basically reciting lines from Stephen Curry and Kevin Garnett. You go right down the line. With Darryn Peterson, the example I would liken to that is if he has crawled, his LLM has crawled every great shooting guard of the last 35 to 40 years. Because when I watch Darryn Peterson on tape, possession by possession, you see a different guy. So when you see him with the ball in his hands, creating an isolation, you can see those glimpses of Jordan and Kobe slicing and dicing and dribbling and crossing over, and in some cases pulling up as well. The thing that really blows me away overall offensively about Darryn Peterson, one of many things, is the release time. I've never seen someone, sometimes I wonder if I'm like watching a video that's been slightly altered online, and it's like, is he really releasing the ball this fast in real life? But it feels like when he shoots the ball, it's 1.25x, sometimes even 1.5x compared to your typical point guard. But there's plays where I've seen him hurling around screens. Oh, that's Rip Hamilton. Sometimes when he squares up for a wide open corner three, I'm like, that is prime vintage Ray Allen. And on other plays, you see the Jordan, you see the Kobe, and no, I'm not going to put that pressure on his shoulders and say that he's going to be to the level of Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan. But you can see when you watch his offensive packages, all these great shooting guards emanating through on different plays. The other thing that's going to shock people once they begin watching Darryn Peterson is how good he is as a defensive player. And when I think of the episode right after the Utah Jazz, essentially, for all intents and purposes, won the draft lottery, because that's our biased take when we see how Darryn Peterson is going to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. We were talking about Darryn Peterson, about how I think, other than Caleb Wilson, he's going to be the best defensive player in the top 10 of this draft, because his instincts, his cerebral play, his killer instinct, he not only has that offensive feel for the game, but I think you're going to see that very much defensively. So when you see him swooping out from the corner and batting the ball out of someone who doesn't see that second defender coming, getting his hands in the passing lanes, and that's a lot of stuff that I think he was just frankly born with. He seems like a very coachable guy, but at the same time, he has so many innate gifts, and that's the reason he went top 2 in this NBA draft.
I'm incredibly excited. There are so many things about Darryn Peterson that I was sour on that I want to cover now as well. One is that with a player with the slightest of question marks, this is where I'm extremely fortunate that we are all fans of an extremely responsible and credible front office and organization. Where if with the Wizards drafting AJ DeBonsa, and they just give to a completely irresponsible and reckless $200+ million contract to Trae Young, I don't consider them to be a serious organization. We see the Sacramento Kings, we see the New Orleans Pelicans with one of the worst training facilities and just dumpy atmosphere in all of professional sports, because the ownership doesn't care about them, versus the New Orleans Saints, which they also own, of course. I wonder which one they care about. So as far as like Darryn Peterson's health, mental makeup, or whatever, I feel so fortunate that the things that are not bound by a salary cap or basketball or a share of basketball revenue, which is how much you invest in your training staff, making a critical view of your coaches, making a critical view of, hey, our GM ranks were completely full with Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck. And Ryan Smith said, you know what? I'm willing to pay a couple $1 million more to bring in another smart person. Yeah, it's Danny Ainge's son, but Austin Ainge was also carving his own independent path, and he was going to get his own GM job. If it wasn't at Utah, it was going to be somewhere else. So everything about, hey, I'm worried about Darryn Peterson because of X, I don't think that those are unfounded concerns, but there's not a better place than the Utah Jazz for some of those things to be kind of worked out, especially because I've been very loud that I don't think he's going to start right away. He might blow the training camp away and start at the 2 guard over Ace Bailey, but the pressure is going to be, hey, we need you to contribute to a winning team, and that's a separate kind of pressure, but it's not going to be like, hey, we need you to be the franchise savior. Hope your cramps aren't showing up, and let's that can be stressful. And we think about players like Keontae George, who has been very vocal about in somewhere between in the second and third seasons, he hired a sports therapist, a psychologist, a therapist to help him work through a variety of things that all young men should probably work through. And he hasn't been as vocal about it as a Kevin Love or DeMar DeRozan. But I think when it comes to navigating to the NBA, to have a 23-year-old on your roster who says, hey, man, whatever you're thinking about, like, I've been through that too. Or if we bring Kevin Love back, like, hey, I understand perhaps the pressures you had in college. There are so many things that I think the Utah Jazz environment are going to have for him. Will Hardy seems like an exceptionally amazing players coach who he's also a hard ass. Like it's perfect. He's going to have a big challenge this year as his first actual winning roster. So all of those things I'm not as worried about. As far as on the court, Riley, you mentioned a lot of what he was able to do as a guard in high school, and one of the concerns I had was and this is where I've gotten over, it didn't seem like he was getting a lot of separation. And because I am an idiot and don't watch a lot of college basketball, one of the things I'm looking for at a top prospects is like, are you blowing past these non-NBA players? Are you completely blowing away separation? And then as I started watching more and more before the draft, and then after we drafted him, so I'm coming at this with a rosier outlook, but just thinking about it again, is some of the very, very, very best players in the NBA right now are deceleration masters. They play in a phone booth where they've never blown by a guy in their entire career, but they are master manipulators and they're very comfortable operating in space. College basketball is not full of tiny people. Like, they're just maybe worse at basketball, but they're big people. And Darryn Peterson was constantly operating in a space of double teams, and he's not completely shaking guys, but he's operating in a phone booth surrounded by 7-footers. Whenever his 3-point shots would be contested all the time, not a problem. Shot amazing from threes, even when they were being contested. And when I think about the Luka Doncic's of the NBA, of like, this guy has every single shot that Luka Doncic has ever taken in the NBA has been contested because he's never blown by a guy in his life, but he's comfortable in that atmosphere. That's Darryn Peterson. He's unflappable in the face of physicality in the NBA. And I'm seeing the high school passing clips compared with what he did in college and saying, this is a guy who can be taught a lot of different things, and that unflappability is what's cool for me. The last thing I'll say about Darryn Peterson before we get to thinking about, like, all right, what does this Jazz team look like with him as the focus here going forward and how important he is. I'm way too online, as many of you know, and there's one tweet that just is very memorable to me, and it's from Denny Carter talking about the various types of tweets you hear from football players. That the typical quarterback tweet is, love my teammates, God is great. The typical running back tweet is, keep grinding. The typical tight end tweet is, derp tight end tweet, right? Like, not very smart guy. And the typical wide receiver tweet is, the enemy speaks kindly and holds a knife. And Darryn Peterson, Justin, I thought of this when you were talking about like his attitude a little bit and who he is. I think he's a psychopath. I think he is the Denny Carter wide receiver tweet guy of like, he is so unusual. He says his favorite movie is The Fugitive. He's a 44-year-old dad of 4 kids, and he has Edward Scissorhands as his Twitter profile picture. I think he is a bizarre human that is hyper competitive in all of the ways that typical idiots like us, like, we don't see when we're playing like our stupid co-ed soccer leagues or whatever. I think he is like Kobe Bryant psychopath level of competitive that you don't see outwardly, especially from an 18, 19, 20-year-old at his age, but something where if you tap into the right environment, I think we got something really special from a competitive standpoint. Riley, what
an additional thought about his favorite movies.
His favorite. What were they? I remember the top one was The Fugitive. What
Uh,
were his other
it
ones?
was The Fugitive. The number two one was Interstellar. So specific
Stellar,
to
yeah.
Interstellar, I want to know who his favorite character in that movie is, because I think someone online posited that perhaps Darryn Peterson, if you've seen the movie, maybe his favorite character in that movie is Matt Damon, because as we know, Matt Damon does a little bit of a heel turn in that movie, and it pulls a rather unsavory move. But I think that's the kind of defense we're going to see from Darryn Peterson, is that calculating, unexpected Matt Damon and Interstellar like defense. And his third favorite movie is The Negotiator. And again, he's bringing that calculated mindset to the floor. And I, again, speaking with bias, I fear for his opponents.
He seems like a fearful guy. I'm excited to see what happens. Riley, on the court. I would encourage everyone to check out what our own Zarin Ficklin wrote for Salt City Hoops, is like some light but detailed coverage on, hey, what does Darryn Peterson look like with all these guys? But what kind of lineup are you excited to see with him? What kind of player do you want to see him play alongside? We know what he can or maybe what he can't do, or what we're excited to see. But for his first year, maybe going forward during these first 4 years of his rookie contract, what are you most looking forward to proving as, hey, this guy is actually going to take the Jazz to new heights?
Yeah, I brought up offense almost the entire time I talked last time, and yet I think what I'm most excited for is to see him with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Walker Kessler on the defensive end. I think that with Flory Badunga at Kansas, and Flory is a great rim protector, at least at the collegiate level. He was able to gamble a little bit, and he had a lot of that in his high school tape as well. And so there was a little bit of athleticism missing there on the defensive end as well. However, I think that when he is paired with a defensive back line of Walker Kessler and Jaren Jackson Jr., I'm just thrilled to see how he fits in there. And how because his strength defensively is just gambling. Is just, I see this passing lane just opened, and I can tell that they're going to make that pass, so I'm going to jump the lane and see if I can get it, and I can recover if not. And I think that, like, with the added insurance blanket of Jaren Jackson Jr. is covering the corner or whatever, and he can pop up and guard my man if I mess up. Like, I that just excites me too. I think it's been a long time since we've seen a guard defender on the Jazz that can really add a level of it's almost like bringing an offense to the defensive side, where not only are we playing really stout defense, but also we are attacking them on the defensive end, which is I think that's like my favorite trait about him on the defensive end. When it comes to the offensive side, I'm just excited to see how he plays with Keontae. I think that him and Keontae really, really mesh well together. The way that they both can handle the ball, pass, shoot, but then also play as the off-ball player and not be like overly reliant on having the ball. I think it really puts the Jazz in an advantageous position where they're not going to have to sit and like wait on whatever building in the possession to the set, I don't know, the very set nature of an offense in a Luka Doncic or a James Harden or whatever. It makes it a much more free flowing offense to have two guys like that, where it's like you have Jamal Murray and Jamal Murray, right? And so I'm very excited about seeing those two working together, and it'll be fun.
The Utah Jazz ran the fewest pick and rolls of any team in the NBA last year. That's because the Jazz do not. You mentioned modern archetypes. I still go back to Mo Cheeks of like this is not the era of basketball of where you have a point guard who just does basic point guard things, and then some player larger than Mo Cheeks ends up doing like the dependent level scoring. It's not paint by numbers offense anymore. you need to have multiple ball handlers. And the virtue of a player like Keontae George is, yeah, he's made a lot of strides as the ball in hand type of player and foul drawing and efficiency and everything like that. But I think even Keontae George would be the first to tell you to be like, there needs to be less pressure on me or else I'm going to wear down. And playoff offenses need multiple ball handlers. I think the Spurs are running into a situation where they have 3 A-tier ball handlers in Fox and Castle and Dylan Harper, and maybe you don't need to have superlative amounts of ball handlers, but you need to have 2 of them in your starting lineup or your closing lineup. I always care, the closing lineup is more important than the starting lineup, and I insist that like maybe he's not ready at the beginning, but I think towards the end of the year we're going to see a situation where it's like, hey, Ace Bailey, like you're going to play 35 minutes. Like you are absolutely going to play like 35 to 38 minutes in an NBA playoff game. But for XYZ lineup, you may not start. In fact, I don't think Walker Kessler is going to close a ton of games. I think it's going to be Jaren Jackson Jr. closing a lot of those, because at the end of the games, you can deal with like, okay, 1 to 3 possessions is not important as like the 50 possessions before that as far as rebounding. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just saying that like I agree that I'm just so annoyed at people saying like, Keontae George and Darryn Peterson play the same position. Who cares? Who cares? That
Especially
literally
nowadays.
does not matter. You need 2 of them. You could use 3 of them. There's no such thing as too few ball handling. Justin, you've watched a lot of frustrating Utah Jazz basketball over the years yourself. Is there something that you're thinking that Darryn Peterson, in this lineup, Darryn Peterson solves so much that we have starved for in the past several decades?
As I tightly pack and roll up all the remaining black and highlighter yellow apparel deep in the confines of the back of my closet. But there's a lot of fun lineups to look at here. The 2 that come to mind immediately, again, drawing back to Darryn Peterson's second favorite movie, Interstellar, that also doubles as the lineup that includes the new dynamic duo of Ace Bailey and Darryn Peterson. Because as we all know, Interstellar more or less means between 2 stars or across from star to star. And that's the future. And I don't know how often they're going to play together, but I'm going to be captivated to see maybe it's at the start or midway through the second quarter. We get those 4 to 6 glorious minutes of Ace Bailey and Darryn Peterson attacking, creating all that gravity. What's going to happen when one of those 2 guys draws a double? Who's going to be wide open on the corner? Who's going to be wide open across? It's going to be, I think the Jazz, one thing I fully expect the Jazz to lead the league in is total dunks this season. I've started I've done some plagiarism of Southern California and those tree planters, and have anointed this new location in Utah, 2026, 27 and beyond, as Salt Lob City. If Walker Kessler comes back, he is going to lead the league in alley-oops. And again, there's going to be a lot of cannibalization. So I don't know if I can declare that any single one Utah Jazz player is going to lead the NBA in dunks. But between Walker Kessler, Jaren Jackson Jr., Ace Bailey flying to the rack, together, this team is going to lead the league in dunks. And that's going to be because of all the gravity and the threats on the perimeter that Ace Bailey and Darryn Peterson present. The other thing I'm really interested to see is just any lineup where Keontae George is on the bench and Darryn Peterson is elevated to that lead guard position. There was a lot of conversation around Peterson if he's truly a lead guard. We haven't really penned right now. I even said it earlier in this podcast already. He has a chance to be the greatest shooting guard in the history of the Utah Jazz. But this is the modern NBA. All great 2 guards are also great ball handling guards. Many point guards are essentially ball handling guards as well. The lines begin to blur. So in Darryn Peterson's case, I want to see how he engineers this offense when he is the number 1 guard on the floor. I want to see him in pick and roll after pick and roll. He's going to have just a magnificently exponential larger amount of spacing to work with at the NBA level than he did at Kansas. And so I want to see what it's going to look like when he's the operator on the floor and he's got Larry on one side, Jaren Jackson Jr. on the other side, feeding Ace Bailey, and we'll see if they pair him with Walker Kessler or other folks. But I'm really excited to see these lineups where Darryn Peterson's going to be called upon to be the lead guard. Don't know if we're going to see that right off the bat, but perhaps he's going to dominate in training camp. We're obviously forecasting way ahead right now, so it'll be interesting to see how soon and for how many minutes that Darryn Peterson will be put in that lead guard situation. You also brought up something really interesting too. It's funny that all of the conversation this week, even leading up to the draft, when many of us thought it was a done deal that Darryn Peterson was going to be the 2 guard for the Jazz, and this concept of there being 6 starters on the Utah Jazz. I'm not as much as interested in who's going to be in the starting lineup, but who's going to be in that closing 5. And you had a great hypothesis, Mark, that perhaps we'll be closing a little bit smaller and going with Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5. And I think that's a sustainable thing, sustainable situation in short pieces, especially at the end of the game where you're going to have all this firepower and likely enough length to have enough defensive integrity. But I am fascinated for the conversation to begin around who's actually going to be formulating that closing lineup in January 2027 and beyond.
So one of the things that I think really helps the Jazz team be extremely competitive right away in this closing lineup that you mentioned, and for all other things, is when you look at DeBonsa, when you look at Boozer and Caleb Wilson, there's a picture of who they can be and who they should be down the line. And certainly Darryn Peterson has also like a specter of, well, who is this guy down the line? But I think Darryn Peterson is the only one of the 4 that has an NBA skill now. Like, you could put him, roll out the ball right now, and you get an, oh shit, he's open from 3. Like, he is not a hypothetical shooter. You watch Mikael Brown playing at Louisville, and the Jazz were not in a position to draft Mikael Brown or anything like that, and so this doesn't have to be a Mikael Brown podcast, but I was just like, oh, this is a really fun, like, maybe his percentages will go up, but that guy just loves to shoot, and maybe he'll be a good NBA shooter, and he looks really good when he shoots it. Oh, his percentages look bad. Like, we don't know exactly what he's going to be. Don't have that problem with Darryn Peterson. Darryn Peterson's a shooter, and he's going to be forever and ever and ever and ever. So when you think about, oh, there's too many mouths to feed, or what does this closing lineup look like? And Lauri Markkanen's got to get his, and Keontae George is going to have the ball. Well, Darryn Peterson fits in all of these lineups simply as like, hey, Rook, go out there. Like, we can't trust you to do XYZ right away, but if you do these ABC things, you're going to get 12 shots a game, and you will contribute to winning offense, and you will help this offense play. So that's why I will continue to emphasize that to anyone who will listen, guys, this is not a cute Utah Jazz team who's finally going to be in the play-in tournament. Guys, this is a 55-win team with home court that is going for the Western Conference Finals. Like this, because Darryn Peterson can contribute towards that. We're going to have someone to add the mid-level exception. Because the Jazz are not drafting, like we didn't, the team right now is not Ace Bailey and Darryn Peterson, and we'll build it from here, and maybe we can win 36 games. I'm sorry, guys, we already have $100 million locked up in our 2 best players, and then you're also going to have Walker Kessler and Keontae George's contracts coming up. This is a team that we've set up to win now, but we've been sandbagging this whole time. Darryn Peterson is going to help winning right now, whereas DeBonsa I could actually see could really drag down a team for a couple years. Cam Boozer, I'm pretty high on what he can do down the line when he figures out NBA speed, because he's a great processor and a good rebounder, good passer, good shooter, but not right away. Darryn Peterson has an NBA skill right now that is like, all right, the gas pedal is all the way down. I'm already irresponsibly, but I think appropriately predicting them to be somewhere around a top 4 seed in the West. And I'm sure there's going to be people listening to this who are not Jazz fans or whatever, and will sound off in the comments calling me completely crazy and get my shit together. I don't care, man. Like, I look at the roster. This, like, it looks amazing. And right now I think they have the 24th best odds to win the NBA championship. Like, I don't think they should have the 4th best odds to win the NBA championship, but 24th is insanely low. And this podcast is not, and probably will never be, sponsored by Giannis Antetokounmpo's favorite partnership company. But I will say, I just think that that's too low. I like to look at the odds to suggest, hey, where do people perceive the Utah Jazz? And just like Lauri Markkanen's most improved player season, people are just perceiving them, I think, way too poorly. Darryn Peterson is a reason to get excited about what everything looks like, even if he doesn't reach his absolute peak of powers now or even shortly in the future. He has a real tangible, we saw the videotape. as Nikias Duncan likes to say, we saw the video. It's on video. Like you can't shy away from it. We saw the videotape. You did it. You saw we saw the shooting. And the last thing I say is when you mention Ace Bailey, and that's your favorite combo, Justin. I will not, guys. I will not entertain conversations of, well, now the Jazz need to trade XYZ to make room for all these guys or whatever. Maybe at the trade deadline, depending on how the first few months of the season goes, we might have to have a tough conversation if somebody doesn't look so hot or whatever. But I don't even want to entertain it then. I will say that this Ace Bailey, Darryn Peterson thing, though, as much as someone like me, I got Lauri Markkanen over my shoulder here, as I got Walker Kessler over my shoulder here. I love these guys. The first and second most important players in the Jazz right now are Ace Bailey and Darryn Peterson. First of all, they make less money than the rest of those guys, like by orders of magnitude because of their rookie contracts. Two, as much as I love Lauri and Jaren and Walker, whatever, the good, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the good playoff team to elite, oh my God, playoff team is defined by Ace and Darryn now. And they are the most important players. So I'm very, very excited to see not just what they look like on the court, but just like, I'm such a sucker for guys being friends and and like the relationship that they have. So it's like seeing Ace Bailey at the Utah Jazz draft party was very cool. And I'm looking forward to that. We had a whole NBA draft to get to, but I want to ask you guys if you have any other Darryn Peterson excitement thoughts or apprehension. Apprehension is welcome here, but you don't have to. Any last thoughts, Riley, on our friend Darryn Peterson?
I have a few thoughts that I've been wanting to get out.
Please,
a while
mic
ago,
is yours.
A while ago you mentioned how one thing that you struggled with when you first watched him was how much space he creates, and that he doesn't necessarily create much space, and how that isn't necessarily something that some of the biggest stars in the NBA do anyway. So it's like, as long as that's not a problem, I do think that his way of creating space is, I think that it's unique in some ways, but I also think that it's a trait that a lot of stars hold in that I think that he rises and fires to create space. Like he's so unpredictable with when he's gonna go up with his shot. It's very like Jalen Brunson-esque to the when he does, it's just like, I don't know how you're gonna stop that. And beyond that, because he's so crafty, you'll see like tape where there was one play where he spun on a defender as soon as the defender turned his hips, and the defender jumps back to go for the shot, and he spins again and finishes at the rim. And it's like, that type of stuff is not normal for an 18-year-old, for a 19-year-old. He's just such an incredibly crafty and quick and like decisive player. It's very fun to watch, and I think that's one of my favorite things about him as well, is that like, you're gonna have fun watching this kid play. He's as fun as any draft prospect that's come through the pipeline in a very, very long time, for any team. I think, echoing what you were saying, one of my favorite examples from the past 15 years is Kawhi Leonard winning Finals MVP with the San Antonio Spurs, and that is so important to me because it's like, Kawhi was giving all-star level impact while he was on a rookie contract. And because of that, they were able to pay Manu Ginobili, they were able to pay Tony Parker, they were able to pay Tim Duncan, and Kawhi was the spring that jumped them from, this is still a pretty good team, to like, oh no, they're a dynasty still. Like they're the team that's actually competing and winning these games in the playoffs, beating the OKC Thunder and all of the Lakers with Kobe. Like, he was the guy that elevated them to that spot. And that's, I think that is what the Jazz have intentionally been trying to do for a while now, which is why they didn't trade a Lauri Markkanen, even though every fan in the world was saying, we need to trade this guy. It's like, no, we want to be able to perform when we get the guy on his rookie contract. And it just so happens that it was the second pick in the draft. I don't think that they necessarily planned on that, but they were thinking, hey, maybe Ace Bailey's the guy, and he'll be on his rookie contract, and we'll try to go for it with him. Or maybe, one of these other guys, Kingston Flemings or something like that, hits and pops, and Darius Acuff or something. I think that it's very intentional by the Jazz to try to make that spring-loaded jump, and I think people are going to be surprised by how quickly that goes. I'm very curious, Justin's thoughts on this. I have my own thoughts, but how do you think it goes wrong for Peterson? If things went downhill, if things didn't turn out, what do you think would have happened?
Well, I'm trying not to be pessimistic because I feel like this era after the last 4 years we had, it's just an avalanche. Speaking of Interstellar again, they've arrived on the wrong planet, and just the 1,000-foot wave of optimism is about to engulf all of us. So it's really hard to think about the way things would go bad. But I'll say this for your earlier question of apprehension, Mark. The more I think about it, taking Darryn Peterson for the Jazz versus one of the other teams picking in the top four, it was a lower risk chance because he was going to Utah versus if he were going to Washington or some other kind of environment. I'm going to use one of your favorite words. He's a lot more modular. So unlike you, I think AJ will be ready to contribute right off the bat. And I think also in the context of Memphis's roster, which is decidedly different than Utah's right now, I think Cameron Boozer will step right in there. He'll probably assume the role of one of the key leaders, if not the leader, immediately on Memphis. And I think he complements, and his teammates will play off him really well there. But for Darryn coming into Utah, it is so low pressure because, again, Utah essentially already has the starting five. So if things go worst case scenario, like Utah's still set. They still have one of the 4 or 5. I'd have to go and examine all 30 rosters in 2 weeks. But I would say right now, Utah's got at worst like the 5th best starting five in the NBA. So very worst case scenario, we're playing with house money. And I love the comp you brought up of 2014, Riley, of the 2014 Finals MVP and Kawhi Leonard, because even back in 2014, everybody knew Kawhi in his 3rd season then, and coming off of that horrific moment in his 2nd year in the previous NBA Finals that he then overcame in the ensuing NBA Finals. In his first NBA Finals, he went 1 for 2 at the free throw line, which opened the door for Ray Allen to hit that game-tying 3 and salvage Game 6 and keep that series alive for the Heat. But in 2014, they absolutely, as we all know, wiped the floor with the Miami Heat. And that was really Kawhi Leonard's coming out party. But at the same time, while he may not have been necessarily the 4th banana on this team, he was surrounded by all of these Hall of Fame veterans. Tim Duncan in the twilight of his career, Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili still playing a very high level of basketball. So even though the assignment wasn't for Kawhi to go out and be the guy and say, hey guys, Kawhi, we need you to score 30 points tonight and absolutely dominate every facet of the game in order for us to emerge victorious and win this championship over the Miami Heat. There's lower pressure, even though they know that Darryn Peterson, and in the previous example, they know that eventually Kawhi Leonard was going to be the guy. But in Utah, you have that soft infrastructure around you. And that really, again, pardon my use of this word, it goes culturally because there's that infrastructure. They're building the brand new state-of-the-art facility at Southtown. They're going to have the best medical facilities, athletic training resources. They're going to instill the right habits, culture, and develop a working plan for Darryn Peterson right from the outset. I feel like all of the levers are in place for Darryn Peterson to be the most successful version he can be in Utah compared to if he were to land anywhere else in the top 5 of this draft. So by nature, or by default, just by drafting Darryn Peterson and bringing him to Utah, he's in a much better position for success.
This means a whole lot to the entire Utah community. I don't want to be too superfluous with how I describe these things, and I don't live in Utah, but I spend a lot of time of my life in Utah, given I work for a Utah-based company, and obviously I've been a Jazz fan my whole life. I know a lot of Utah people, and I know the community, and this is a team that over the past 4 years, the average Utah citizen was confused. They're like, what do you mean Utah is not winning? Like, what do you mean I shouldn't go see them? Like, what do you mean I like this is their 3rd, 4th season in a row of not winning? It is incomprehensible given the Utah Jazz history, and it's usually falls on deaf ears when you try to explain to somebody, well, here's what tanking is, and here's what they're trying to do, and here's what Lauri Markkanen is, and all these other things, and here's why Lauri Markkanen's not playing, and here's why Walker Kessler's not playing for the entire season, and here's why Walker Kessler's grumpy about his restricted free agency. All of that is going to completely wash away when the ball gets rolled out on the floor in the fall, to say nothing of the experience we have over the summer. And it's because, like, hey, we didn't draft a late lottery Darius Acuff or Kingston Flemings where it's like, man, they could be okay. They could be an all-star, maybe something. Like, this is a transcendent talent that is going to change the Utah Jazz from the team that we've all grown up with and the Utah community has kind of grown up with, is like, yeah, they're a good team that it's worth bringing your family to, hey, I've been a fan for 10, 20, 50 years, and they are the best thing that we've ever seen in this community since the early 90s. And that a lot of that pressure is on Darryn Peterson, not as like, oh, he needs to be the savior right away, but it's more that a lot of where the heights that the Jazz can go is going to be defined whether he's an okay player or a transcendent superstar. And everything that we have to go from where we're starting here is he is on the transcendent superstar path, and that is scintillating to think about. I think we should all be very excited. What I'm very also fortunate about as far as late lottery picks and all this other stuff is, well, I didn't have to worry about who the Jazz were going to take. I think if Cam Boozer was favored by maybe 20% of people, of like that just rough straw poll of who people preferred, I don't think I would have loved it at the end. I think Peterson was a riskier pick, so I was kind of, I don't know. But after talking to smarter people like you guys, I got convinced, like, no, Peterson should be the pick in the 2 hours before the draft. But we didn't have to make any choices about anyone riskier. But now that you've seen a little bit of where these guys have landed, Riley, who are 2 or 3 guys that you were thinking like, hey, I loved them before, or I didn't love them before, but now they're in this situation, and either I love where they landed and it's gonna exacerbate their issues, or they're gonna really accelerate what they're good at. Do you have some guys you love?
I I love LeBaron Philon, which
Stole my guy.
it pains me. It pains me that he dropped all the way down to the 20s, but I think that I think he both fits what Philly's doing, but also it's just like unfortunate because he's going to be limited by the fact that he can't start anytime soon. I mean, you've seen situations like the Jazz drafted Rudy Gobert when Enes Kanter was on the roster, and Enes Kanter ended up getting traded because he wasn't as good as Rudy Gobert. And so it's like, if you're the Sixers, it's like, it's fine. It's like, if we like this guy more than the other guys, we'll find a way to make it work. I really like Cameron Boozer's fit in Memphis. I think these top four picks, like, I couldn't see them going any other way. I just, there's no possible way that like any of these teams would pass up the players, especially given how well they fit their teams and how well they fit like the type of players that they like to get. With Cam Boozer in particular, his fit with Zach Edey is phenomenal. I think that that's going to be such a fun pairing to watch, where you can have this like jumbo gigantic 4-5 pick and roll. And I think that like a lot of teams, the Jazz included, are building their teams big in the West so that they can go and beat the Wembanyamas and the Isaiah Hartenstein Chet combos. And I mean, to that, extent, I really liked the Ademara pick by OKC. I think that his fit, if they do decide to go on from Isaiah Hartenstein, which I think would be a mistake by them, but I think they could get a first round pick or more for him if they were to trade him. But I think Ademara fits really, really well with that OKC team. I think him and Chet having 2 7-foot plus long, lanky guys that can just swallow up the defense or the offense. It's just a fun pairing there. I think those are my favorite fits. I'm excited to see what Braden Burries does in Milwaukee, but there is a lot of competition at the guard spot. But yeah, I'm curious to hear Justin's thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, where to begin? Um, I'll just dovetail on the Burries concept. So I really like what Milwaukee did in the wake of the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. I don't know if anybody they brought back from Miami is going to be this amazing franchise piece, but the way the NBA is trending, obviously you still need a star or two. And again, when you think about the Utah Jazz right now, it's an embarrassment of riches because they cross off so many of these different qualifiers. But I feel like watching the Indiana Pacers in the 2025 finals and obviously the Thunder that year who were even deeper. And then we saw the instant pendulum swinging back, the example of what happens when you're the Oklahoma City Thunder and you don't have enough depth because you're befallen by multiple health issues to multiple players at the worst possible time. We've seen examples now for the last 4 years. Boston, again, just like the Thunder this year and last year, they're a great example of what it looks like when you have a lot of depth and then you don't have as much healthy depth in the coming years. But there's been this pattern emerging now in the last 3, if not longer, stretch of champions where you need this combination of having superstars at the top of your roster, but depth is just as important. And I'm not talking about just having a solid starting five. I'm talking about really high quality 1 through 10 depth. And so I think Milwaukee, even though they may have not necessarily brought back any sort of star level player in the Giannis trade, they're acknowledging that they had a shortage of quality talent across their roster. And so I think this trade really replenished their roster. And then they added to that with 2 interesting picks at 10 and 13. And so to me, Braden Burries, very high on him. Again, if the Jazz had ended up picking somewhere between 5 and 8, Burries would have been at the top of my list in that range because I think he's incredibly complimentary. I see him as a Jamal Murray archetype. In terms of his ability to really score at any level on the floor. I'm convinced by his mid-range. He's a really solid three-point shooter. And while he doesn't have athleticism that jumps out of the gym, I've seen times where he's penetrated either in transition or attacking from the perimeter. And he just has the ability to finish extremely strong at the hole. So I think immediately he'll figure in as a starting 2 guard, but there's also instances kind of akin to Keontae George in the second quarter, maybe, where if Ryan Rollins or whoever's going to be the starting point guard for the Milwaukee Bucks goes to the bench, I can also see him fitting in as the backup 1 instantly. And that's where I see those kinds of similarities. And I guess, again, the example of the modularity with Braden Burries. But I'm really high on Burries, and I think he has a really high floor. So to me, taking Burries is the safe bet at 10. And then the big swing comes at 13 with Nate Ament, who maybe outside of Caleb Wilson, even though I think Wilson has a higher floor than most prognosticators, I think Ament out of like maybe the top 20 prospects has perhaps the rangiest set of outcomes of anybody. He could bust out of the league. He could be one of the top 4 or 5 players in this draft. And after losing Giannis, he's kind of one of those unicorn type players. He's not as freakishly built, but I think the potential and the range of outcomes is really, really high. And I think if they hit on Ament, that would turn out really well for Milwaukee. And if you hit on Ament, he essentially becomes one of your main franchise pieces. And so I like what Milwaukee did strategically in the draft in terms of essentially they created a hedge for themselves. And they've also replenished their roster kind of 1 through 8. There's more work to be done, but I was watching that Milwaukee team in March, and they were looking plenty thin to the point where it was Ryan Rollins, and then they were highly reliant on Larry Nance Jr.'s brother and Ousmane Dieng. So I think this replenishment is going to be a little bit more impactful for Milwaukee. And then I'm really relieved for Sacramento Kings fans because no one got screwed in the lottery. And probably for that case in back-to-back years, nobody got screwed worse in the lottery than the Sacramento Kings. And the fact that Acuff was still on the board for them at 7, and Acuff's another guy who I think, even though there's obvious defensive limitations with him, super excited for him. I think he is in the mold of Damian Lillard with kind of a perhaps a little bit more svelte, but still yet powerful Deron Williams type body. So to me, I got higher hopes for Darius Acuff on the Sacramento Kings. I think he's got a higher ceiling than De'Aaron Fox ever presented for the Kings. So they've essentially made up for that loss of both De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton in the span of about 2 years. So I think he's an amazing building block. I know a lot of people think of Darius Acuff as a score first guy. And I think he's plenty capable of going out there and getting 25 points a night whenever you need him to. But again, I think people are going to be surprised by how passing and team oriented Darius Acuff Jr. is. I watched him in person in March, and even though Arkansas was facing off against the number 13 seeded Hawaii Rainbow Warriors, I was taken aback in the first half by how intent Darius Acuff was on being a table setter and getting all of his teammates involved, because Darius Acuff is the kind of talent, he knows he can go and get a bucket whenever he needs to, but he saw it as equally important to unlock all of his teammates. And I think with Sacramento in this rebuilding phase and players who are hopefully taking the next steps like Neat Clifford, Dylan Cardwell, as well as Maxime Reynaud, who's perhaps the most unsung player in all of the NBA right now, I think Acuff is the right guy to unlock all of that young existing talent on the Kings up to the next level. As for the top four, I'm right in step with you, Riley. I think it played out exactly the way it should have. And it's really funny because I also believe that each of the four players who went 1 through 4, they ended up each in the best possible situations for themselves. Obviously, it would have been spectacular to have AJ in Utah. But again, when you're talking about the modularity advantage that Darryn Peterson presents against AJ DeBonta, he's just a little bit better of a fit. If you think they're going to have, if they're going to be exactly the same level of player, if they're both going to be 98 on the NBA 2K slider in the end, well, the tiebreaker is going to be fit. Utah's already got plenty of forwards. They have all these players who are jostling to slot in at the 3, including Ace Bailey. It just makes sense to go with the shooting guard. So from that regard, where Washington really doesn't have a lot of firepower, you have Trae Young, who just inked the big extension. He's going to be ball in hand as well. But other than those two, that being Trae, AJ, and Keyshawn George and Alex Sark, he's kind of got the defined spots he's going to occupy on the floor. There's not a lot of firepower on that team. And with AJ being such a high usage player, he's kind of plug and play to me in Washington. And then we've already dove into how many different ways that Darryn Peterson is the perfect puzzle piece for the Jazz, whether you need him to be the go-to guy, maybe a couple months down the road, a couple years down the road, and everything he can also bring to the table simultaneously. Now, he's a great fit for Utah. And then again, Boozer's the perfect fit in Memphis relative to Washington, where they need a breakout scoring machine in DeBonta, and then in Utah, where you just already, frankly, have 59% of your salary cap allocated to guys, to 2 players who primarily play the 4. It's just really hard for me to wrap my mind around having, 3 of your 5 best players on the Utah Jazz all playing primarily the 4 position. But in Memphis, where they're probably going to trade away Ja Morant in the next 2 to 3 weeks and essentially not have a de facto point guard, it makes a seamless fit for Boozer to be that offensive hub in Memphis. And then in Chicago, the guy I'm very high on, Caleb Wilson, he could be perhaps the greatest draft pick for the Chicago Bulls since at least Scottie Pippen. They're also starved for star power, and that is a really clean white canvas in Chicago right now. You got Modest Buzelis. You still have Josh Giddey, who may be a future piece for Chicago. But other than that, you just kind of plug in Caleb Wilson and you kind of let him do his thing. And in Utah, I don't think he would have made as much sense unless we were picking 4th and he was the default pick. But again, in Utah's kind of ready to rock and roll. Mark, you think they're going to win 55 games? I'm going to be conservative and put them at 49.5 and take the cowardly route and keep expectations low and give them a very low bar to jump over with flying colors. But it makes sense for Caleb Wilson to be in Chicago, where he can kind of get his bumps and bruises and feel things out and have room to explore. And there's going to be lower pressure on him, even though there are the expectations of him, kind of being the chosen one in Chicago. But I love his two-way ability. I see shades of Kevin Garnett defensively. I see shades of Kobe Bryant offensively in terms of what he's able to do in the mid-range. So it's really interesting to me how all of the 4 top players in this draft, I think all 4 of them ended up in the most optimal situations possible.
So, as I'm very fond of saying when it comes to NBA draft season, this is not an expletive-free podcast necessarily, but I don't need to be as forward with this. I like to say, we don't know expletive about expletive. Is how I like to describe the NBA draft. But here are some dumb thoughts out of my brain. First of all, love Acuff, and I think in my limited watching of college basketball, but also more importantly watching way too much NBA basketball, it's immediately apparent to me which guards are bad at defense and have no hope versus guards who actually have never been taught anything about defense. And Acuff has always been the guy in high school, and sometimes you get taught in high school and sometimes you don't. And certainly John Calipari doesn't give a shit if Darius Acuff is doing anything defensively. So I don't know if he's going to be a good defender. I'm not projecting him as that, but I think like, hey, the first time he gets put into a situation where it's like, hey, actually your minutes depend on what you do back there is helpful. I consider Domantas Sabonis to be similar situation to Lauri Markkanen that the Kings are going to go forward with from here on. Is like I don't think he's as good as Lauri Markkanen, of course, but I think the Kings should just keep Sabonis to help raise up Darius Acuff and whoever they draft next year early in the draft, because they're not going to be very good next year. But let's talk about some guys I hate. Because I at least am able to think about like, hey,
Yes.
you know, I don't I feel bad talking about like, oh, how do I feel about this guy being a great player? Because like I don't really know these things, but situations that I think just don't make any sense for me. I'm going to start out with Oklahoma City ending up with Bennett Sturts out of Iowa. It feels like this is a team that should really be doing a little bit more with the draft. Like they shouldn't be drafting high in the draft, right? And so for Bennett Sturts, he's a guy who can do a little bit of everything in the NBA, but I'm not sure if that's a player that like if you're looking at your cap situation as the Thunder and needing like, hey, we need more swings in the middle of the draft because otherwise pretty soon we're just always going to be picking 20th to 30th. Like this is an opportunity to get like some real like juicy talent, especially because your recent draft picks have not totally worked out. Mara is another guy that I think fits more of that mold of like that's a juicier talent. I'm lower on him than others, but I can see how that's thing. Bennett Sturts doesn't do it for me. Also, he's a guy who played at Drake and I think would be forgettable in most other contexts. Jaden Quintance out of Kentucky, I think, has a lot of people who are really excited about what he can be. I just don't understand why the San Antonio Spurs, similarly to the Oklahoma City Thunder, like they're going to be a great team picking at the end of the draft in a lot of years. Why are you taking one of your few swings on a guy who's probably not going to play until December, January? Like he just tore his meniscus. Sure, a lot of talent. Why are you doing that at pick 20? I think that's a little bit too risky and has shades of Udoka Azubuike to me, right? I think the Spurs are a lot smarter than a Dennis Lindsey-led Utah Jazz organization, but that just doesn't, that didn't feel super great to me. And finally with Alex Caravan out of Connecticut going to the Kings, as much as I'm going to praise the Kings for Darius Acuff, it was funny if you listen to the Deuce and Mo podcast. They're a great Kings duo. They're a fabulous NBA podcast in general, but they're not just a Kings oriented thing. I highly recommend listening to Deuce and Mo. They interviewed Coach Hurley out in Connecticut about Caravan, and they were like, and so Hurley said Caravan is the best role player he's ever coached, and I'm like, all right, like that's a nice pick at like pick 45 maybe or something like that. But if you have another first round pick, like I know it's the end of the first round, but you're getting that 4-year team control, and you can do that in the second round too, I understand. But like if you're getting this end of the first round, a double team option situation on the back end of that contract, I'm looking for a little bit more juice and potential. Malik Thomas is a guy I love out of Arkansas. And just it felt to me like just more Nick Stauskas version 2 for the Kings, but at least they're not drafting Alex Caravan in the lottery. So just I like to end on some just guys. I'm like I don't really know what we're doing here with a few of those guys. So because I agree with all your positive comments. I love Philon. I love some of these other guys. Hannes Steinbach. I liked some of his. I don't know expletive about expletive, but Steinbach did some things that I'm like, oh, you have some NBA stuff. I thought that was kind of cute out of Charlotte. And as we wrap it up here, as I'm just checking the news, the Jazz did not end up buying back into the second round. No news yet on undrafted free agents. Perhaps by the time you're listening to this, the Utah Jazz will have some guys that they're bringing into summer league and training camp, and we'll have some more episodes to cover maybe some of those other guys, because right now the only guy who's on a two-way, booked as a two-way for the Jazz this year, is Blake Hinson, who's on his second year as a two-way, and he could be cut at no penalty to the Jazz at any time, but I think they believe in him enough to at least occupy one of those two-way spots. And Elijah Harkley and Oscar Tshiebwe will not. Tshiebwe will not be back as a two-way for the Jazz. We'll see about Harkless. I know he's a fan favorite for a lot of people, but as far as we know, that we have two other two-way spots open as far as wrapping up the NBA draft. I wanted to record on this Wednesday night to give us an opportunity to remark on anyone the Jazz might buy into, but like it's Darryn Peterson and Darryn Peterson alone, and I think that's enough to bring the Jazz into the next era. So lots more Salt City Hoops to come, and about free agency. Listen to all the other episodes that we've covered about guys to sign, interesting avenues the Jazz can take with Walker Kessler, with Keontae George. Please take a look at everything we got going there. Riley, any last thoughts?
I think we're in for a very fun next 5 or so years. It's gonna be fun.
I agree. Mr. Sweeney, pleasure to have you. What are you thinking about as we wrap it up?
Famous last words. I was trying to do as good of a job as I could of not pinning ridiculous expectations upon the Utah Jazz. But now that the draft is in the books and free agency is on the way, I'm beginning to dive deep into my Excel sheet and update all of my 30-team rosters. And as I look at this Utah Jazz roster, position by position, this is going to be, assuming everyone's healthy, and as importantly, assuming this is also the assumption that Utah is able to re-sign Walker Kessler and match whatever offer sheet he ends up signing, or if he just takes the offer that Utah gives to them. I think we're looking for Utah position by position at the best roster the Jazz have had since at least 2010, if not ever. So that 2010 roster had really good versatility at every position in the backcourt. It was Deron Williams to go with Wesley Matthews. Sadly, Wesley Matthews only spent 1 year with the Jazz, but tremendous two-way player. And then Andre Kirilenko was the small forward. You had a lot of length at your small forward position. Kirilenko going about 6'8" with nearly infinite wingspan. Cam Boozer's dad at the 4, Memo at the 5. You had the luxury of bringing Paul Millsap off the bench. And then you also had Kyle Korver, CJ Miles, and Ronnie Brewer in the fold. So you had this whole slew of guards, and you had all this positional versatility that, even though I think if we were to look at the last 15 years, the best roster, the best team would be the 2021 Jazz, there was too much overlap between Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley in the backcourt. They both only went about 6'1" and 6'2". You didn't have enough size from your guards versus the 2010 team. You were starting Royce O'Neal and Bojan Bogdanovic. I think you had a little bit more firepower from, if you compare them to Boozer and Kirilenko, and then obviously Rudy Gobert takes the cake at center. But position by position, this Utah Jazz team is quite possibly the most loaded we've ever seen. If you even look at the two NBA Finals rosters, and yes, I'm examining who's regarded to be like the two greatest players in the history of the Jazz in Stockton and Malone. But even then, I don't think they were as strong at their starting small forward spot. And even through all those great teams of the 90s, the main remark, outstanding question was, if only the Jazz had a center. And now the Jazz have a center. And so you go back and look at the 80s. I think this roster, if everyone stays healthy, if Peterson and Bailey continue to grow, we're looking at the strongest roster from 1 to 5 that the Jazz have ever had. And I think the way you cap off that argument is that you nail your MLE in free agency.
And I'm just thrilled that the optimism from my brain is pervading like a poison to everyone else, and I think we're absolutely going to stun some people. Riley and Justin, I'm so thrilled to just mash you together on Salt City Hoops for this one, because I needed some help to be the excitement, it needed to be shared. and Darryn Peterson is going to be a star for the Jazz. We're going to have an amazing time this summer. And for everyone, thank you for joining for Salt City Hoops. Please keep subscribing and listening to what we got going on. We love doing this. We love just spilling out our brain thoughts to you, and we love just doing this for fun. So subscribe to the channel or wherever you're doing your podcast stuff, and we'll have a good time. Next up is just going to be reacting to free agency news and everything. If the Jazz don't quite make a move with the mid-level exception, I'll be back next week to just give opine on things like the Giannis trade, Trae Young, LaMelo Ball is apparently on the trading block as we speak. So we'll be reacting to some other NBA news if it's not Utah-centric. I love following the entire NBA, and I'll be back next week to talk about some of that, either by myself with a couple beers or with some friends like Riley or Justin joining me today. So thank you, Riley and Justin. Thank you all for listening. This has been Salt City Hoops. Good night.